Human defies all odds, feasting on the planet's deadliest predator. Lieutenant Liam Drake sat alone in the fading light of a crimson sun, the sky stretching in strange shades of purple and orange above him. He stared into the fire, watching the flames dance as they devoured the last remnants of his kill, the Shadow Stalker, the planet's apex predator. The massive creature's leg, now impaled on a makeshift spit, hissed as it roasted, filling the air with the rich, tantalizing scent of cooked meat. Drake didn't mind the bloodstains on his armor or the bruises that painted his skin. They were the price of victory, and that victory tasted sweeter than anything he had eaten in a long time. The beast had put up one hell of a fight, ambushing him with stealth and speed, but it had underestimated humans. That was the one mistake every predator made, underestimating the prey that could turn into something far more dangerous than it appeared. Drake grinned as he tore another chunk of meat from the creature's bone. The taste was gamey, rich like venison, and yet so much more powerful. It was unlike anything Earth had to offer, and it only reminded him of the thrill of surviving in hostile territory. His fire crackled and popped, sending sparks into the air as the last slivers of sunlight dipped below the horizon. He wiped his hands on his torn undersuit, the heat of the fire contrasting against the cool alien air. The planet, so alien and hostile when he first landed, was starting to feel familiar. He had adapted, had become part of the landscape. The wildlife, however deadly, had become just another challenge to face. Drake stood and stretched, the muscles in his arms aching, a reminder of the close battle he had just fought. His eyes scanned the darkening landscape, alert for anything out of place. This world was dangerous, unpredictable, and while he had killed the beast, he knew there were more lurking in the shadows. That's when he saw it. A movement, just outside the glow of his campfire. His senses immediately went on high alert. A figure, tall and poised, stood at the edge of his camp. At first, it appeared to be a mirage, the kind of thing that happens when your mind starts playing tricks in the twilight. But as his eyes focused, the figure became clearer, sharper. A Nyxian. She was a striking sight, with long, silvery white hair that caught the dying sunlight, giving her an almost ethereal glow. Her armor was sleek and form-fitting, designed for battle, but still holding an elegance that suggested grace over brute force. Her purple eyes met his, wide and full of surprise, as if she had never seen anything like him before. She froze, taking in the sight of the man who had just devoured their planet's deadliest creature, his hands smeared with its blood. Drake stood slowly, making no sudden movements, keeping his hand close to his plasma pistol, just in case. He didn't know whether she was friend or foe, but there was something about her presence that sent a spark of curiosity through him. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady and confident. He wasn't sure how she would respond, but he wasn't backing down. The Nyxian's mouth opened, but no words came at first. She simply stared at the roasted creature, her gaze flicking between the meat and the human who had killed it. After a long moment, her translator kicked in, her voice flowing through the device in a melodious tone. What are you eating?" she asked, her voice betraying a mix of shock and disbelief. Drake couldn't suppress a grin as he held up the leg bone of the Shadow Stalker. "Dinner," he said, taking another bite of the meat. "You want some? I've got plenty." She blinked, still processing what she was seeing. Finally, she stepped forward, her movements cautious, though there was an undeniable curiosity in her purple eyes. "That is a Shadow Stalker? You killed it?" Drake nodded, not at all bothered by the blood on his hands. "Yeah, tried to ambush me while I was checking the perimeter. Figured it needed some manners." He gestured to the log beside him. "Come sit down. I could use some company, and I bet you've got a lot of questions." And Nyxian hesitated, still unsure of what to make of this human who seemed unfazed by killing their planet's deadliest predator. Finally, she moved to sit beside him, though she kept her distance, clearly still not sure what to think. "You killed a Shadow Stalker?" she repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Alone?" Drake leaned back,
casually tearing another piece of meat from the bone. "Yup, not the first time I've had to take down something bigger than me. Humans are good at that, getting the job done no matter the odds." She studied him, her purple eyes scanning him like he was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "And you fought it, hand to hand?" Drake chuckled, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Had to. Ran out of plasma charges. No choice but to get up close and personal." Avia looked at him, her gaze flickering between the man and the roasted beast. "I don't know if I should be impressed or terrified," she muttered. Drake laughed, the sound rich and full of amusement. "Well, I'll take impressed. Terrified doesn't do much for survival." The silence between them stretched, filled only by the crackling fire. Avia's eyes never left the creature, and for a moment Drake thought she might say something more, but then she broke the silence with a soft question. "You really aren't afraid?" she asked, her voice quiet but curious. Drake looked over at her, meeting her gaze. "Afraid? Nah. Look, I've seen some crazy things in my time. Out there," he gestured broadly to the strange alien landscape, "this is nothing. You ever heard of Australian wildlife? That's something to be afraid of." Avia blinked, taken aback. She couldn't help but laugh, the sound light and surprised. "I'm beginning to think you're unlike anyone I've ever met." Drake smiled, but his eyes held a glint of mystery. "Yeah, well, you're not the first to say that." The fire crackled, the silence returning, but this time it was a different kind of silence, one filled with unspoken understanding, curiosity, and the strange sense that this meeting might be the beginning of something unexpected. But little did either of them know, this was only the beginning. The Shadow Stalkers weren't finished with Liam Drake yet. The hunt begins. The crackling fire cast an orange glow that flickered against the alien sky, but it was not the warmth of the flames that made the hairs on the back of Lieutenant Liam Drake's neck stand up. It was the silence. The night air had fallen unnaturally still, too still. No rustling leaves, no chirping insects, just the low hum of the atmosphere. It was the kind of silence that a trained soldier instinctively knew meant danger. Avia sat beside him, her eyes wide with growing concern. "The wildlife is too quiet," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper as she studied the dark horizon. Drake's grip tightened around his plasma pistol, his other hand instinctively moving to check his combat knife. He was no stranger to danger, but something felt different this time. Something was watching, and it wasn't just the creeping feeling that he was being hunted, it was the shift in the air, the kind that precedes something bad. "Listen," Drake said, his voice sharp. "The Shadow Stalker pack, they're coming." Avia's gaze flickered nervously toward the edge of the camp, her purple eyes narrowing as she tried to peer into the dark. "How can you be sure?" Drake didn't answer right away. Instead, he scanned the horizon, his eyes calculating every detail of the landscape. It had only been a matter of time. A single Shadow Stalker had been dangerous enough, but now a pack was on the hunt, and they had the scent of the blood from their fallen comrade. They would not rest until they found him. "They'll be here soon," Drake said, already moving toward his gear.
Drake paused, his senses on high alert. Something's not right. Before Avia could respond, the ground beneath their feet trembled, and from the darkness of the trees, the full force of the Shadow Stalker pack emerged. They were no longer just hunting, they were preparing for war. Drake's hand tightened around his weapon. The fight had just begun. And this time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that humanity was not to be underestimated. The edge of desperation. The night had fallen completely now, blanketing the planet in an impenetrable shroud of darkness and damp, storm-laden air. The ridge had offered no protection, only a brief glimpse of safety before the storm intensified once more. As Drake and Avia made their way toward the settlement, the ground beneath them seemed to shift with every step. The trees, once majestic and towering, now appeared to bend and groan under the relentless howls of the wind. Yet it wasn't the storm that weighed heavily on their minds. It was the growing realization that the pack wasn't far behind. Drake's pulse quickened, but his mind remained clear. Every step was calculated, every movement precise. The familiar weight of his plasma pistol against his side was a constant reminder that he wasn't just running from the danger, he was preparing to face it. But something gnawed at him, a feeling deep in his gut. The shadow stalkers were adapting too quickly. They had gone from simple territorial creatures to something more tactical, more strategic, and that, Drake knew, was a problem. "Drake," whispered Avia, her voice urgent but tinged with unease. "They're too close. I can hear them." Drake's sharp eyes darted toward the trees, but the relentless storm kept the predators out of sight. His instincts told them that they were close, too close. "We're almost there," he muttered, though even he wasn't convinced by the words. The settlement was visible now, a cluster of lights flickering in the distance, but it felt miles away. And the more the storm raged, the more it seemed to envelop them, swallowing their chances of escape. But that wasn't what worried him the most. It was what Avia had said, that they could hear them. The pack had learned to hunt in the storm, to use the howling winds as their cover, as if the storm itself was a tool in their deadly arsenal. It wasn't just about brute force anymore. It was about patience, precision, and taking their time. Suddenly, a growl pierced the air, a deep, guttural sound that was so close it almost felt like a physical force. Drake's muscles tensed, and he instinctively pulled Avia closer, guiding her toward a narrow, rocky outcrop. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice steady but urgent. They crouched low against the jagged rocks, the storm whipping around them like a living thing. The growl came again, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of large, clawed feet scraping against the wet ground. "They're right on top of us," murmured Avia, her eyes wide with both fear and admiration for the humans who had survived so long in this hostile environment. "What now?" Drake's mind raced as he surveyed their surroundings. The settlement was still too far to reach, and with the pack closing in, their options were rapidly shrinking. His hand brushed against the explosive charges in his pack, and a dangerous idea began to form.
"Draw them in," he said, his voice low and tight with controlled adrenaline. "We'll use the terrain to our advantage." Avia shot him a sharp glance. "Are you insane? You want to fight them here?" Drake's lips curled into a grim smile. "This is our best shot. If we can make them think we're running, again, they'll follow us. We lead them straight into the open, and we hit them hard." Her gaze flickered to the distance where the settlement still beckoned, just out of reach. She didn't speak for a long moment, but her expression shifted. A warrior's resolve had settled over her like a cloak. She was no longer just fighting for survival. She was fighting alongside him. "Lead the way," she said, her voice a quiet whisper in the storm. Drake didn't waste time. He activated the first of the explosive charges, watching as the ground ahead shifted with the force of the blast. The rocks cracked, creating a small but effective diversion that sent the first of the shadow stalkers rushing toward the noise. He could feel their eyes on him, burning through the storm, seeking him out as prey. "Now!" he barked. In a blur of motion, they sprinted, moving toward a cluster of boulders ahead of them, using the storm and the chaos to mask their approach. Behind them, the pack was closing in, drawn to the sounds of their movement. The growls of the shadow stalkers grew louder, more frantic as they zeroed in on their prey. But what the pack didn't know was that Drake had anticipated their move. He had lured them in, led them into the heart of a deadly trap. He and Avia dropped low as they reached the boulders, taking cover just as the shadow stalkers rushed past, their massive bodies tearing through the underbrush in pursuit. With one last glance toward the distant settlement, Drake hit the final detonator. A series of explosions erupted around them, explosions that sent debris flying and dust swirling into the air, momentarily blinding the pack.
the air filled with the deafening roar of the explosion, the storm intensifying around them as the ground shook. Drake's heart pounded in his chest, but his focus never wavered. The trap had been set, and now they had only moments to act before the pack realized what had happened. "They're disoriented," Avia said, her voice sharp with anticipation. "Now's our chance." Without a word, Drake grabbed her hand and led her into the chaos. They charged forward, using the smoke and the debris as cover, their weapons raised. The Shadow Stalkers, temporarily stunned by the explosions, were slow to react, their senses overwhelmed by the sensory overload. Drake fired first, the plasma blasts cutting through the thick air and striking the first of the creatures in the side. It shrieked in pain, tumbling into the dirt, but the remaining pack members were already regrouping, their instincts guiding them to retaliate. Ervia moved beside him, her plasma rifle steady in her hands. She fired, her shots hitting the mark with precision as the creatures charged. It was chaos, a symphony of fire, growls, and the crackling of electricity as the two humans fought against the predators. But there was no time to savor the moment. The ground was trembling again, and Drake knew they had only minutes before the pack fully recovered from the explosions. "We push forward," Drake shouted over the sound of the storm. "To the settlement, now!" They darted between the boulders, their pace increasing with every step as the roar of the pack behind them grew louder. The Shadow Stalkers weren't done yet. They were learning, evolving, but Drake had learned something too. He wasn't about to be prey. Not today. Ahead, the settlement's lights flickered like a beacon in the storm, and with the pack still in pursuit, Drake knew one thing for sure. They were going to make it. They had to.